My name is Sloane, 33 years old, and I am still trying to comprehend the sheer cruelty my own flesh and blood is capable of. As the successful owner of a high-stakes crisis management firm in Chicago, I solve disasters for a living. But nothing prepared me for the disaster sitting in my passenger seat. Last month, as my car was crushed by an SUV in the freezing rain, my mother did not call 911. She crawled over my bleeding body, grabbed my late father's trust fund documents, and left me to die in the snow. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to survive. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Chicago meant maintaining a flawless facade. Our sprawling estate was beautiful, but the emotional reality was a freezer. My mother, Beatrice, only cared about appearances, designer labels, and her golden child, my younger sister, Melody. I was just the workhorse, the one expected to fund their lavish lifestyles. The night of the accident, I was driving Beatrice home from another expensive dinner she insisted I pay for. The December wind was howling off Lake Michigan, throwing sheets of freezing rain against my windshield. The roads were slick black ice. I kept both hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, navigating the treacherous intersection at Michigan Avenue. Beatrice was too busy complaining about the service at the restaurant to notice the traffic light. I saw the headlights of the massive SUV a split second before the impact. The sound was deafening, a horrible crunch of metal and shattering glass that echoed through my bones. The force of the crash threw my sedan violently across the icy pavement, slamming us into a concrete barrier. The pain was instantaneous and blinding. My chest was pinned tightly against the crushed steering wheel. Warm blood poured down my forehead, stinging my eyes. I could barely draw a breath. My ears were ringing violently. Through the haze of shock, I turned my head slightly to the right. Beatrice was sitting perfectly upright in the passenger seat. The airbag had deployed flawlessly on her side. She did not have a single scratch on her perfectly made-up face. "Mom!" I gasped the word, tasting like copper in my mouth. "Call for help. I cannot breathe." She did not look at me. She did not reach out to check my pulse or wipe the blood from my eyes. Instead, she unbuckled her seatbelt with a frantic energy and leaned over the center console, her elbows digging into my fractured ribs. She was violently rummaging through the crushed back seat. "What are you doing?" I choked out, the pain searing through my chest with every syllable. She ignored my agony. Her manicured hands were desperately clawing at the debris until she found exactly what she was looking for: her imported Italian leather handbag. And right beneath it, the thick manila envelope containing the legal documents for the $12 million trust fund my late father had left entirely in my name. She clutched the envelope to her chest, her eyes wide with a frantic, greedy relief. She checked her reflection in the shattered visor mirror, wiping a smudge of lipstick from the corner of her mouth. "Mom, please," I begged, my vision starting to fade at the edges. "My phone is gone. Call an ambulance." Beatrice finally looked down at me. Her expression was completely devoid of maternal warmth or panic. It was the cold, calculating look of a woman who had just found her golden ticket and was not about to let a dying daughter slow her down. "Hold on, Sloane," she said. "If I don't get these papers to Kendrick tonight, the bank will foreclose on my house. The ambulance will find you." With those words, she kicked the passenger door open. The freezing winter air whipped into the destroyed cabin. She stepped out into the snow, wrapping her designer coat tightly around her shoulders, clutching my financial legacy against her chest. She slammed the door shut, leaving me trapped in the mangled wreckage. I watched through the shattered glass as her figure disappeared down the dark, icy street, not once looking back. The physical agony in my crushed chest was nothing compared to the shattering realization that my mother had just chosen money over my life. As the cold darkness finally pulled me under, my last conscious thought was not fear. It was absolute freezing clarity. If I survived this night, I would make sure she lost absolutely everything forever. 7 days later, my mother finally decided to make an appearance at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She did not rush through the emergency room doors with tears in her eyes. Instead, she strolled into the pristine lobby, wearing a tailored cashmere coat, holding a venti iced matcha latte, and acting as if she were waiting in line at a luxury spa. She approached the main reception desk with an exaggerated sigh, tapping her perfectly manicured fingernails against the marble counter. "Excuse me," she said to the head nurse, using the tone she reserved for service workers who were not moving fast enough. "I am here to see my daughter Sloane. She was brought in a week ago after a car accident. I assume she is still in the intensive care unit. Let us get this over with so I can go to my lunch reservation." The nurse, a stern woman named Brenda, did not even look up immediately. She typed my name into the hospital database. When the file loaded, Brenda stopped typing. The color seemed to drain from the screen as she read the glaring red alerts attached to my medical record. Brenda slowly looked up and met my mother's annoyed gaze. "You are Beatrice?" she asked. My mother stood taller, adjusting her silk scarf. "Yes, I am her mother." "Which floor is she on?" Brenda closed the file and folded her hands on the desk. "She is not on any floor, Mom. Your daughter is no longer a patient at Northwestern Memorial." Beatrice frowned, gripping her matcha latte tighter. "What do you mean she is not a patient? Did she pass away?" There was no grief in her voice, only a sharp edge of inconvenience. Brenda leaned forward, her expression turning entirely clinical and cold. "No, Mom. Sloane woke up 5 days ago. Because she carries premium private health insurance, she arranged for a private medical evacuation. She was airlifted out of our facility via helicopter to an undisclosed elite rehabilitation center." Beatrice scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Airlifted? How dramatic. Well, tell me where she went so I can send a driver to pick her up. I need her signature on some extremely urgent family documents today." Brenda did not blink. "I cannot tell you where she is. In fact, I cannot tell you anything else about her condition. Your daughter invoked a strict HIPAA block the moment she regained consciousness. You are completely restricted from accessing any of her medical information. Furthermore, she had her legal team serve our hospital with official documentation." Beatrice slammed her hand on the counter, spilling a drop of green liquid onto the marble. "I am her mother. I have rights. You will tell me exactly where she is right now, or I will have your job." Brenda reached into a drawer under the desk and pulled out a thick, legally sealed envelope. She slid it across the counter toward Beatrice. "You do not have any rights, Mom. Inside this envelope is a court-ordered restraining order filed by your daughter's attorneys. It mandates that you remain at least 500 feet away from her at all times. If you attempt to locate her, contact her, or bypass the HIPAA block, the police will be notified immediately, and you will be arrested for violating a federal protective order." Beatrice stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The smug entitlement evaporated instantly, replaced by a frantic realization that she had lost complete control over her primary source of income. But Brenda was not finished. She pulled out a second piece of paper from a separate folder. This one was a printed invoice. "Before you leave, Beatrice, there is one more matter the hospital administration requires you to settle." Brenda slid the invoice directly over the restraining order. "Since you were a passenger in the vehicle during the collision, and you chose to flee the scene of a major accident, the City Emergency Services policy requires the fleeing party to assume liability for the deployment of the trauma team." Beatrice looked down at the paper. The total printed at the bottom was $18,000. "What is this?" she shrieked. "I am not paying this. I barely have a scratch. You owe $18,000 for the emergency vehicle dispatch and the hazardous road cleanup." Brenda stated, her voice loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear. "Because you abandoned a critically injured victim, the insurance company rejected the claim. The bill has been sent directly to collections under your name. Have a wonderful lunch reservation, Mom." She turned her back, ignoring my mother completely. Beatrice stood frozen in the lobby, clutching her expensive bag, realizing her nightmare had just begun. While my mother was having her meltdown in the hospital lobby, I was sitting in my luxury penthouse overlooking the freezing Chicago skyline. I was confined to a custom wheelchair with a heavy brace wrapped around my fractured ribs and a cast on my left leg. The physical pain was a constant dull roar, but my mind had never been sharper. There were no tears left in me. Crying was for people who felt betrayed, and you can only be betrayed by someone you actually trust. I had stopped trusting my family a long time ago. Sitting across from me at my sleek glass dining table was my attorney Pierce. He was a ruthless corporate litigator who specialized in high-stakes asset protection, and he did not mince words. Pierce rotated his laptop so the screen faced me. He pressed play. The high-definition video filled the screen. Because my car was equipped with a dual-facing cloud, synced dashcam, the impact of the crash had automatically triggered an emergency backup to my private server. I sat in perfect silence as I watched the interior cabin footage from that night. I watched my own bleeding unconscious body slumped against the steering wheel. I watched my mother frantically dig through the back seat, ignoring my dying gasps. I watched her perfectly manicured hands seize the manila envelope containing my late father's trust fund documents. And I listened to the crystal-clear audio of her declaring that she needed to save her house before she abandoned me in the freezing snow. Pierce paused the video just as she slammed the car door shut. He folded his hands, resting them on top of a thick legal pad. "The footage is completely damning," he said, his voice steady. "We can hand this over to the district attorney right now." Fleeing the scene of an accident with catastrophic injuries is a felony. Theft of estate documents adds another layer. She would be arrested before dinner. I stared at the frozen image of my mother's retreating back. My breathing was shallow, restricted by the chest brace, but my pulse was completely calm. "No," I said softly. "Not yet. Arresting her for leaving the scene is too easy. She would just cry in front of a judge, play the traumatized victim, and get probation. I want her to lose the one thing she values more than her own life, her money and her social standing." Pierce raised an eyebrow, adjusting his glasses. "Well, you might get your wish faster than you think. I received a very interesting phone call this morning from the estate executor. It seems your sister Melody and her husband Kendrick have been extremely busy while you were in a coma." I leaned back into the wheelchair. Kendrick was my black African-American brother-in-law, a commercial real estate broker, whose arrogance was only matched by his greed. He had always resented my financial success and constantly tried to insert himself into my business dealings. "What did Kendrick do?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely conversational. Pierce opened a folder. "Kendrick contacted the estate lawyer yesterday. He presented the documents your mother stole from your car. He claimed that because you were severely incapacitated, he had assumed emergency power of attorney. He was inquiring about the immediate liquidation of certain assets within your $12 million trust fund, specifically the commercial property in Aspen. He told the executor that the family needed cash to cover your astronomical medical bills." A cold smile spread across my face. They really thought I was either going to die or wake up brain damaged. They thought they could just sweep in and drain the accounts before I ever regained my faculties. "Do they know the documents they stole are completely useless without my signature?" I asked. Pierce shook his head. "No. They assume the papers give them a direct path to the assets if they can just prove you are unfit to manage them." The estate lawyer stonewalled Kendrick, of course, but Kendrick was incredibly persistent. He demanded blank transfer deeds. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the gray winter sky. The trap was already building itself. "Pierce, what happens if they attempt to sign those deeds without my consent?" Pierce leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "If they forge your signature on a real estate transfer document and attempt to execute a sale across state lines, it instantly becomes federal wire fraud and interstate grand larceny. The mandatory minimums are severe. They would go to federal prison." "Perfect," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "Do not stop them, Pierce. Let them think that they have won today. I really want them to forge my name. I want them to commit federal forgery first." Pierce left my penthouse shortly after our meeting, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the city below. I was resting my injured leg when the private elevator chime suddenly echoed through my foyer. My building has strict biometric security. The only way anyone could access my floor without my direct authorization was if a staff member manually bypassed the system. The heavy oak doors swung open and the scent of my mother's overpowering floral perfume hit me before she even stepped into the living room. Beatrice walked in first, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Right behind her was my younger sister Melody, wearing a designer tracksuit she definitely bought on credit, and Kendrick holding a sleek leather briefcase. I later found out they had slipped a crisp $100 bill to the new rookie concierge at the front desk, spinning a sob story about a surprise visit to their severely injured relative. "Oh, my poor sweet girl," Beatrice wailed, rushing toward my wheelchair with her arms outstretched. She stopped a few inches away, carefully, avoiding any actual physical contact that might wrinkle her outfit. "We have been out of our minds with worry. You look absolutely terrible. Why on earth did you lock us out of the hospital? We are your family." Melody nodded, pulling out her phone as if she were about to start recording a vlog. "Honestly, Sloane, you caused Mom so much unnecessary stress. She has barely slept. You really need to stop being so dramatic and secretive. We just want to help you recover." I stared at them, my expression completely blank. The audacity was almost impressive. My mother had literally stepped over my bleeding body to steal documents, and now she was playing the grieving matriarch. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I just waited for the real reason they had broken into my home. I knew the fake sympathy would evaporate the moment money was mentioned. Right on cue, Kendrick stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Melody's shoulder. He looked down at me with an arrogant, patronizing smile. He was dressed in a sharp, custom suit, playing the role of the successful broker, even though I knew his career was currently in shambles. "Listen, Sloane." Kendrick began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "We know you are in a lot of pain and your judgment is clouded right now. Medical bills are piling up. The rehabilitation center you chose is insanely expensive. As the man of the family, I felt it was my duty to step up and handle the heavy lifting so you can just focus on healing." He snapped his briefcase open and pulled out a thick stack of papers. He placed them directly onto my lap, right over my heavy chest brace. "What is this?" I asked softly, barely glancing at the documents. "A solution," Kendrick said proudly, puffing out his chest. "Since you are incapacitated, I used my industry connections to secure an incredibly lucrative deal. I found a luxury hotel developer willing to buy your father's commercial lot in Aspen for $4 million cash. It is a brilliant move. We can liquidate the asset, cover all your medical expenses, and properly manage the rest of the trust for the good of the entire family. You do not have to worry about a thing anymore." I looked down at the top page. It was a transfer of deed. The text had been heavily doctored, clearly rushed by whatever shady notary Kendrick had bribed. The document essentially stripped me of all ownership rights and handed complete control of the sale proceeds to a joint account managed by Kendrick and Melody. "You want me to sign away a $4 million property right now?" I asked, looking back up at him. Beatrice clasped her hands together, nodding eagerly. "Yes, darling. It is the only sensible thing to do. You are clearly not in your right mind after the accident. Let Kendrick handle the business. He knows what he is doing." Kendrick pulled a gold pen from his inner pocket and clicked it, holding it out to me. "Just sign on the dotted line, Sloane. Do it for the good of the family. We are just trying to protect you from financial ruin." They stood there, a united front of greed and manipulation, waiting for the broken, discarded daughter to simply hand over her empire. They truly believed I was too weak to fight back against them. They had no idea that I was already holding all the winning cards. I looked at the expensive gold pen, then up at his smug face. A cold and extremely dangerous smile finally fought its way to my lips. I took a deep breath. I let the pen hover in the air for a second before I casually pushed the entire stack of papers off my lap. They scattered across the expensive hardwood floor like trash. Kendrick blinked, his arrogant smile faltering in confusion. He reached down to grab them, sputtering about my fragile mental state. I looked at him dead in the eye. Do you really think a severe chest injury suddenly erased my memory, Kendrick? I know exactly why you are so eager to liquidate a $4 million asset. It has absolutely nothing to do with my medical bills and everything to do with your impending bankruptcy. Melody gasped, stepping forward. What are you talking about? Kendrick is a top-tier broker. I let out a dry laugh. He was a broker, Melody. Past tense. Did he forget to mention what happened in New York last year? You know, the little incident where his license was revoked for embezzling client funds. He is currently under investigation by his own brokerage for pulling the same shady maneuvers. He does not want to help me. He desperately needs a massive commission from this fake sale to pay off his legal fees before he ends up in a federal penitentiary. Kendrick turned a shade of gray. His jaw tightened, and he took a threatening step toward my wheelchair. Shut your mouth, Sloane. You do not know what you are talking about. You are delusional from the heavy hospital painkillers. But it was my mother who truly lost her mind. The sweet matriarch act vanished in an instant, replaced by the vicious monster I had grown up with. She stepped right over the scattered documents, her face twisted in rage. She pointed a sharp manicured finger mere inches from my face. "You ungrateful little brat," Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You have always been a selfish burden. We came here to help you to save this family from financial ruin, and all you do is throw accusations. You think you are so brilliant because you have a successful company. You think you are better than us. You are nothing. Your father only left you that trust fund because he pitied you. He knew Melody was going to marry well and be the beautiful face of this family. He knew you were an unlovable, cold workaholic who would die alone. He threw you a bone out of guilt because nobody else could stand to be around you. The words were designed to break me, to reduce me back to the scared teenager who just wanted the approval of her mother. But the woman sitting in this wheelchair had survived a shattered chest and a freezing betrayal. Her insults felt like rubber bouncing off a steel vault. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I just looked at her, memorizing the ugly twist of her features. "Are you quite finished?" I asked softly. Beatrice was panting, her chest heaving with righteous anger. "Sign the papers, Sloane, or we will take this to court and have you declared mentally incompetent. We will take everything anyway." I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I did not pull out a pen. I pulled out a small remote and pressed the red panic button twice. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy oak doors to my penthouse burst open. Two of my private security guards, massive men in black suits, stepped into the living room. "Remove these 3 people from my property immediately," I instructed my guards, my voice devoid of emotion. "If they resist, call the police and press charges for trespassing and harassment." Kendrick tried to puff out his chest, pointing a finger at the guards. "You cannot touch us. We are her family." The lead guard did not hesitate. He grabbed Kendrick by the collar of his suit and twisted his arm behind his back, with efficiency forcefully marching him toward the door. Melody began shrieking, grabbing her designer purse as the second guard took her by the elbow. Beatrice stood frozen, staring at me in shock. "I am your mother," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You cannot do this to me." I leaned forward in my wheelchair, ignoring the sharp pain in my ribs. "You stopped being my mother the second you left me to bleed out in the snow. Get out of my house." The guard grabbed Beatrice by the arm, dragging her backward as she kicked and screamed. I watched the oak doors slam shut behind them, cutting off their yelling. The penthouse fell into a deep silence. I looked down at the transfer documents scattered across the floor. They had shown their hand. Now it was time to let them dig their own graves. Less than 24 hours after having my family physically removed from my penthouse, the digital retaliation began. My phone, sitting on the marble kitchen island, started vibrating with a relentless urgency. Notification after notification flooded the locked screen. I wheeled myself over and picked it up. My inbox was exploding with aggressive text messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, and even a few old college acquaintances. "How could you treat your mother like that? You are completely out of your mind. You need serious psychiatric help, Sloane." I did not feel a single pang of hurt or betrayal. I just felt a cold professional curiosity. I unlocked my phone and opened Instagram. There it was, occupying the top of my feed. Melody had posted a 6-minute video to both her Instagram and TikTok accounts. She was sitting in her lavishly decorated living room, wearing a plain gray sweater with her makeup done perfectly to look as though she had been crying for days. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. Guys, I did not want to bring this to the internet. She began dabbing her eyes with a tissue, but my family is in a terrifying crisis. My sister Sloane was in a horrific car accident last month. She suffered severe head trauma and is currently exhibiting dangerous signs of psychosis. We tried to visit her yesterday just to bring her some soup and check on her recovery. Instead, she completely snapped. She is addicted to heavy hospital painkillers. She hired armed thugs to violently assault our elderly mother and physically throw us out into the street. She has locked away my late father's estate and is refusing to pay for her own medical care. We are so scared for her. Please pray for our family. The video already had tens of thousands of views. The comments were a cesspool of outrage directed entirely at me. People who had never met me were calling for my arrest. Melody was soaking up the sympathy, using the tragedy to boost her follower count and manipulate public opinion. To an average person, this kind of coordinated smear campaign would be utterly devastating. They would panic cry or rush to post an angry defensive response. But I was not an average person. I am a crisis management public relations executive. Handling vicious media storms and digital assassinations is literally what I do for a living. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I rolled my wheelchair into my home office and booted up my primary workstation. The glow of 3 large monitors illuminated the dark room. I approached my sister's pathetic smear campaign the exact same way I would approach a corporate espionage case for a Fortune 500 client. I opened a fresh encrypted file on my server and began archiving everything. I used screen recording software to capture her videos on every platform, ensuring I caught the timestamps and view counts. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single hateful text message from my relatives, logging their phone numbers and the exact times they sent the threats. I categorized the flying monkeys into a neatly organized spreadsheet. Aunt Susan sent 3 threatening messages. Uncle Robert left 2 voicemails calling me a psychotic hazard. Cousin Jessica publicly commented that I belonged in a straitjacket. I saved it all. In the world of crisis PR, we call this gathering the ammunition. Melody was incredibly sloppy. She did not realize that by posting those videos she was publicly defaming me with provable lies. Claiming I had traumatic brain damage and was abusing prescription narcotics was not just family gossip, it was libel. Claiming I assaulted our mother was slander. Every view, every share, and every comment was just adding another 0 to the eventual civil damages she would owe me. I spent 3 hours meticulously documenting the digital footprint of their entire operation. I even pulled the metadata from her video upload. It showed she had spent 2 hours editing the footage, adding filters to make her eyes look red and splicing multiple takes together to perfect her crying act. It was a calculated, premeditated hit job. When I was finished compiling the dossier, I forwarded the massive zip file to Pierce, my attorney. My instructions were simple and precise. I typed the email with cold efficiency. Pierce, here is the evidence of their public defamation campaign. Do not send a cease and desist letter. Do not ask them to take the videos down. Let them keep posting. Let them dig the hole as deep as they possibly can. They think they are controlling the narrative, but they are just handing us the rope we will use to hang them in court. I hit send and slowly closed my laptop, feeling completely calm and prepared. 2 days passed in absolute silence. The social media storm that Melody had orchestrated generated a massive amount of internet sympathy and thousands of angry comments directed at me. But internet sympathy does not pay the mortgage. It certainly did not pay off Kendrick's looming legal debts or Melody's maxed-out credit cards. When the initial shock value of her crying videos wore off, the flying monkeys stopped texting me and moved on to their next online outrage. My family quickly realized that their public smear campaign had completely failed to force my hand. I had not panicked. I had not reached out to beg for their forgiveness. I simply ignored them, starving them of the reaction they desperately needed. Panic must have set in at my mother's house because, on the morning of the third day, the private elevator to my penthouse chimed again. My security guard carried in a floral arrangement so obscenely massive it looked like it belonged at a mobster's funeral. It was a chaotic explosion of white lilies and orchids. My mother's favorites, of course, because she never actually bothered to learn mine. Tucked into the center of the ridiculous display was a thick cream-colored envelope. I wheeled myself over and pulled the card free. It was a handwritten letter from Beatrice, though the corporate manipulative phrasing had Kendrick written all over it. My dearest Sloane. The letter began in her swirling cursive. The events of last week were a terrible misunderstanding born from trauma and fear. We were terrified of losing you, and we let our emotions dictate our actions. We are deeply sorry for overwhelming you while you were in such agonizing pain. Please let us make it right. We want to host a private family dinner for you tonight at the Capitol Grill. Just us. No business, no paperwork. Just a family trying to heal. We love you. I read the words twice, letting the sheer hypocrisy wash over me. A fake apology letter from a woman who had literally stepped over my bleeding body to steal a manila envelope. Kendrick had clearly convinced her to pivot. Aggression and public shaming had not worked, so they were reverting to the classic narcissist playbook, the love-bombing phase. They wanted to lower my defenses, get me out of my secure penthouse, and trap me in a public setting where they assumed I would be too polite to cause a scene. They still thought they could manipulate me into signing over the Aspen property if they poured enough expensive wine and shed enough fake tears. I tossed the letter onto the counter and smiled. They wanted a family dinner. I was going to give them one. I picked up my phone and called Pierce. They invited me to dinner tonight, I told him the moment he answered. I am going to accept. Pierce let out a heavy sigh over the line. Sloane. That is a terrible idea. They are desperate. Desperate people do incredibly stupid things. You do not need to subject yourself to their abuse. We already have the dashcam footage. We have the footage of the accident I corrected him, but we do not have Kendrick on tape admitting to his financial crimes or his intent to defraud the trust fund. If I sit across from him tonight, his ego will not allow him to stay quiet. He will try to extort me. He will threaten me, and I want every single syllable captured clearly. Pierce remained silent for a moment before conceding. Fine, but you do not go in there unprotected. I spent the next few hours preparing for the evening. Navigating my wardrobe with a fractured rib cage and a heavy chest brace was a frustrating challenge, but I eventually settled on a sharp-tailored black blazer that easily concealed the medical equipment. I did not want to look like a victim. I wanted to look exactly like the executive I was. Then came the most important accessory. As a crisis public relations specialist who frequently deals with high-level corporate espionage, I had access to cutting-edge security technology. I took a micro-audio recorder, no larger than a standard lapel pin, and secured it to the underside of my silk blouse. It was voice-activated and broadcasted a live encrypted stream directly to my private server, the exact same server Pierce currently had access to. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I was pale and battered, relying on a wheelchair to move, but my eyes were cold and focused. I was not walking into a trap. I was setting one. When my private driver pulled up to the valet stand at the steakhouse that evening, the trap was completely set in motion for my family. When my private driver pulled up to the valet stand at the steakhouse that evening, the trap was completely set in motion for my family. The restaurant host escorted me and my wheelchair through the dimly lit, elegant dining room of the Capitol Grill. The heavy scent of roasted garlic and expensive leather filled the air. I found them sitting in a secluded private booth at the back of the restaurant. Beatrice, Melody, and Kendrick were already sipping expensive champagne, looking like a picture-perfect advertisement for upper-class familial bliss. The moment they saw me, the performance began. Beatrice leaped up from her leather seat, rushing over to kiss the air next to my cheek. She smelled of gin and desperation. "Oh, Sloane, darling, you look so much better," she cooed, ushering the waiter to pull away a chair so I could park my wheelchair at the head of the table. "We are just so incredibly thrilled you agreed to meet with us." I did not smile. I simply locked the brakes on my wheels and adjusted my blazer, ensuring the hidden microphone had a clear acoustic path. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You said this was about healing. Start healing." Melody exchanged a nervous glance with Kendrick before leaning across the table. Her voice was dripping with rehearsed sweetness. "Sloane, we need to talk about the night of the accident. Mom is completely devastated that you think she abandoned you. It was a massive misunderstanding caused by severe medical shock." Beatrice immediately raised a napkin to her dry eyes. "I was terrified," she whimpered. "The airbag deployed and my ears were ringing. I saw you bleeding and I simply panicked. I grabbed the documents because I thought I could use them to flag down a passing car. I was going to get help. You have to believe me." My mind was entirely blank. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it became suffocating. "A misunderstanding," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You explicitly told me you needed to get the papers to Kendrick to save your house before you kicked the door open and left me freezing to death." "That is the head trauma talking," Sloane Kendrick interrupted smoothly, waving his hand as if dismissing a child. "Your brain created a false memory to cope with the trauma. The doctors warned us about this. You are confused, and that is perfectly okay. We forgive you for the outburst at your apartment. We are here to move forward as a united family." Kendrick reached into his leather briefcase sitting on the floor next to him. He pulled out the exact same heavily doctored deed of transfer for the Aspen property and placed it on the white tablecloth right next to my water glass. He pulled out his gold pen and laid it carefully on top of the paperwork. "So, to move forward and heal, we just need to finalize this minor administrative detail," Kendrick said, flashing his salesman smile. "The hotel developer is getting impatient. We need your signature tonight, Sloane. Once this is signed, we can pay off the hospital and put this entire ugly chapter behind us." I looked at the forged deed, then back up at Kendrick. My pulse was completely steady. "I am not signing that document, Kendrick. I am never selling the Aspen property, and I am certainly not giving you access to a single penny of my father's trust fund." The salesman's smile vanished instantly. The mask slipped, completely exposing the desperate, vicious man underneath. Kendrick leaned across the table, his eyes wide with raw fury. He slammed both of his fists down onto the heavy wooden table so hard the crystal wine glasses shattered against each other, spilling red wine across the pristine white tablecloth like fresh blood. "Listen to me, you arrogant little cripple," Kendrick hissed, his voice vibrating with venom. "I am done playing nice. You are going to sign this deed right now. If you do not, I will drag you into civil court and tie up your precious company in so much litigation you will go bankrupt. I will leak every ounce of your medical records to your corporate clients and prove you are mentally unfit to run a business. I will ruin your entire life. You are going to give me that $4 million or I will take it from you by force. Do you understand me?" I did not flinch. I let his explicit threat ring clearly into the hidden microphone taped beneath my blouse. I wanted to make sure the audio file captured every single syllable of his extortion attempt. "Are you threatening my life, Kendrick?" I asked him calmly. "Are you threatening my life, Kendrick?" I asked him calmly. Kendrick scoffed, pulling his hands back from the table as if he had suddenly remembered we were sitting in a crowded restaurant. "I am simply stating a fact, Sloane," he sneered, straightening his suit jacket. "You can either cooperate and keep this family intact, or you can be stubborn and lose everything. Your choice." He snatched the forged deed off the table and shoved it violently back into his leather briefcase. Beatrice glared at me, her face flushed with cheap wine and sheer indignation. "You are a monster," she spat, grabbing her designer clutch. "I should have left you in that car. At least then we would not have to deal with your insufferable arrogance." Melody stood up, knocking her chair back. "Come on, Mom, let us go. She is obviously too brain damaged to understand we are just trying to save her." The three of them stormed out of the restaurant, leaving me alone at the table. I did not feel fear or anger. I just reached under my blouse and pressed the small button to stop the recording. The audio file was instantly uploaded directly to my highly secure private server. I had everything I needed, but I knew Kendrick was not going to stop there. Desperate men rarely choose to surrender when they are completely cornered. They always double down. Through the extensive investigation my forensic accountant conducted later, I learned exactly what my brother-in-law did after they stormed out of the steakhouse that evening. Kendrick and Melody drove straight to his failing real estate office. They were completely out of options. The hotel developer in Aspen had given them a strict deadline to produce the signed deed of transfer, and Kendrick desperately needed the massive commission to pay off his mounting legal debts in New York. Since extortion had failed, he decided to completely bypass me. Kendrick utilized his connections in the shady underworld of commercial real estate. He made a late-night phone call to a disgraced notary public named Gary, who had helped Kendrick falsify property lines a few years prior. Gary owed Kendrick a favor, and for $5,000 in cash, he agreed to risk his remaining credentials. They met the very next morning in a cheap diner parking lot. Sitting in the front seat of Kendrick's leased Mercedes, Melody held the stolen document steady while Kendrick practiced my signature on a spare piece of paper. According to the digital trail my team uncovered, he spent an hour tracing my handwriting from an old birthday card Beatrice had provided. When he felt confident enough, Kendrick took his gold pen and forged my name at the bottom of the official deed of transfer. Gary, the corrupt notary, sat in the back seat and stamped his official seal right next to the fraudulent signature, legally notarizing a document I had never even touched. They actually thought they were being incredibly clever. They assumed that because I was recovering from a severe accident, I would not be monitoring my financial portfolios. They believed they could quickly push the paperwork through the county system, secure the millions from the developer, and hide the funds in offshore accounts before I ever noticed the property was missing. They severely underestimated the level of security I maintain over my assets. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, I was sitting in my home office reviewing client contracts. My physical pain was slowly subsiding, replaced by a sharp, hyper-focused energy. My cell phone suddenly chimed with a high-priority notification. I glanced down at the screen. It was an automated email alert from the Pitkin County Clerk's Office in Colorado. As a standard security protocol, I had placed strict monitoring flags on all properties associated with my name. Anytime a legal document was filed against my real estate parcels, an automatic notification was immediately dispatched to my email and my attorney's office. I opened the email and downloaded the attached PDF file. It was the deed of transfer for the Aspen commercial lot. I zoomed in on the bottom of the page. There it was, my perfectly forged signature sitting right next to an official notary stamp. They had actually done it. They had crossed the line from a nasty family dispute straight into a major federal crime. By filing a fraudulent real estate deed across state lines, they had just committed interstate grand larceny and federal wire fraud. I stared at the forged signature on my computer monitor and let out a soft laugh. The bait had been taken. My family had willingly walked right into the snare. I picked up my phone and forwarded the document to Pierce with a single sentence. "The trap is set." The trap is set. Sending that short email to Pierce brought a profound sense of satisfaction, but I did not have time to sit around and gloat. I had a multi-million-dollar public relations firm to run. 2 weeks had passed since the restaurant incident, and my physical recovery was progressing enough for me to return to my corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. Navigating a bustling executive floor in a wheelchair with a chest brace was not ideal, but I refused to project weakness to my staff or my clients. My firm handles catastrophic media blowouts for major corporations. We extinguish fires before they destroy reputations. Leading by example meant showing up and taking control regardless of my physical pain. It was a Tuesday morning, and the office was humming with intense energy. I was in the main glass-walled conference room, leading a high-stakes strategy meeting for a tech company facing a data breach scandal. About 15 of my top executives were seated around the long mahogany table, taking notes as I directed the narrative control plan. I was speaking clearly and decisively, mapping out the press release schedule on the digital whiteboard. Everything was operating smoothly until the heavy glass doors to our lobby swung open downstairs. Through the transparent walls of the conference room, I saw my receptionist stand up abruptly, looking flustered. A man in a cheap gray suit pushed past her desk, ignoring her protests. He marched straight through the open floor plan, weaving through cubicles and heading directly toward my glass-enclosed meeting. My security guard was on the other side of the building handling a delivery, so there was no one to physically intercept him. The man pushed the conference room door open uninvited. The entire room fell into a stunned silence. My executive stared at the intruder. "Are you Sloane?" he asked loudly, his voice cutting through the professional atmosphere. I placed my dry erase marker on the tray and turned my wheelchair to face him. "I am she. Can I help you with something? Or do you always barge into private corporate meetings?" I asked, my tone freezing the air in the room. He did not flinch. He simply reached inside his cheap jacket and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. "You have been served," he announced, tossing the heavy stack directly onto the mahogany conference table. The papers landed with a loud slap right in front of my senior vice president. The process server turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving a heavy, awkward silence in his wake. Every single person at the table was staring at the documents and then looking nervously back at me. In the corporate world, being publicly served with legal papers is considered a massive embarrassment. It is a tactic designed to humiliate the target and undermine their authority in front of their subordinates. It was a classic move straight out of the playbook from Kendrick and Beatrice. They wanted me to look chaotic and out of control. I did not flush with embarrassment or ask my team to leave the room. I maintained my absolute composure. I calmly rolled my wheelchair forward and picked up the heavy stack of papers. I flipped open the cover sheet. The bold legal header at the top of the page read, "Emergency Petition for Conservatorship and Appointment of Guardian." Below that, I read the names of the petitioners, Beatrice and Melody. I scanned the initial summary paragraphs. They had hired a sleazy, aggressively priced family law attorney to petition the state of Illinois to strip me of all my legal, financial, and medical rights. According to the sworn affidavits attached to the petition, they were claiming that I was suffering from severe accident-induced psychosis. They alleged that the head trauma from the crash had fundamentally altered my personality, making me paranoid, aggressive, and entirely unfit to manage my $12 million estate. They requested that Beatrice be immediately appointed as the sole conservator, giving her total control over my bank accounts, my properties, and my medical decisions. It was the exact same legal maneuver used to trap celebrities in abusive financial prisons for years. My senior vice president cleared his throat, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "Sloane, do we need to pause the meeting so you can handle this?" he asked respectfully. I looked up from the absurd pile of lies and perjury. A genuine, relaxed smile crossed my face. I tossed the conservatorship petition carelessly into the nearest trash can right in front of my entire leadership team. "Not at all," I replied smoothly, locking eyes with my team. "We have a crisis to manage for our client. Please turn to page 4 now." The meeting proceeded for 2 hours without interruption. I ignored the legal documents sitting on the table, and my team did not dare ask. When I dismissed my team, their respect had visibly deepened. They had just watched their boss get served with a humiliating family lawsuit and brush it off like it was just a minor typo. When the glass doors closed, I dropped the corporate facade. I picked up the documents and dialed Pierce on my line. "They filed for a conservatorship," I told him the moment he answered. "They are claiming I have severe accident-induced psychosis and they want total control over my estate." Pierce cursed sharply under his breath. "This is an escalation, Sloane. A judge could temporarily freeze your assets pending an investigation if they present a compelling enough sob story." A conservatorship is essentially a legal death sentence if it gets approved. I wheeled myself over to the window, looking down at the Chicago traffic. They are not going to win, Pierce. I want you to immediately schedule a comprehensive psychiatric and cognitive evaluation for me. Do not just get any doctor. Get the absolute top neurologist in Illinois. I want a brain scan, a psychological profile, and a sworn medical affidavit proving my cognitive function is operating at the top 1%. I want the evaluation completed by tomorrow afternoon. Consider it done, Pierce replied, his tone shifting to match my clinical efficiency. What else do you need? I need ammunition, I said softly. People who file frivolous conservatorships are usually projecting their own financial ruin. I want you to hire the most ruthless forensic accountant in the city. Tell him to dig into the personal finances of my sister Melody and her husband Kendrick. I want every bank statement, every credit card bill, every hidden asset, and every tax return. From the last 5 years, I want to know exactly how desperate they are. 2 days later, I sat in the sterile, immaculate office of Dr. Gregory at the best research hospital in the state for 6 hours. I underwent grueling cognitive tests, psychological evaluations, and an MRI. I answered questions about my memory, my decision-making processes, and my emotional stability. When it was over, Dr. Gregory signed a 10-page sworn affidavit stating unequivocally that I possessed exceptional mental acuity and showed absolutely zero signs of trauma-induced psychosis or cognitive decline. My medical armor was completely impenetrable. Later that evening, I returned to my penthouse to find a secure encrypted file waiting in my inbox. It was the preliminary report from the forensic accountant I had hired. I opened the spreadsheet and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The financial reality of my sister's supposedly perfect life was laid bare on my monitor, and it was an absolute disaster. Melody, who loved to brag on social media about her luxury vacations and designer handbags, was drowning in a sea of high-interest debt. According to the accountant's deep dive, she had secretly maxed out 7 different credit cards. Her total revolving credit card debt was sitting at a staggering $150,000. She was taking out cash advances on one card just to make the minimum payments on another. It was a classic Ponzi scheme of personal finance, and the collapse was imminent. But Kendrick's financial profile was even worse. The accountant had uncovered a series of massive tax liens filed against his name. Kendrick had been aggressively hiding his real estate commissions and drastically underreporting his income for the last 3 years. The Internal Revenue Service had finally caught up with him. He owed the federal government over $200,000 in back taxes and penalties. The IRS had already initiated the final stages of garnishing his wages and seizing his remaining assets. I leaned back in my wheelchair, staring at the glowing screen. The puzzle pieces locked together perfectly. This was never about my health or my mental stability. They did not care if I lived or died in that car crash. The conservatorship petition was an act of pure, desperate survival. Melody and Kendrick were financially drowning, and they viewed my $12 million trust fund as their only life raft. If they could convince a judge that I was insane, they could drain my accounts to pay off the IRS and fund their lavish lifestyle before their house of cards completely collapsed. I printed the financial reports and the affidavit, placing them neatly into a folder. I traced my finger over the edge of the paper, feeling a cold wave of anticipation wash over me. My family brought a pocket knife to a gunfight. The courtroom showdown was scheduled for next week, and I was bringing the heavy artillery. The courtroom showdown arrived on a bleak Wednesday morning at the Cook County Courthouse. I arrived exactly 20 minutes early, wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit that effectively hid the heavy medical brace wrapping my ribs. Pierce pushed my wheelchair through the heavy oak double doors of the courtroom with quiet authority. We took our places at the respondents' table. Across the aisle, sitting at the petitioner's table, was my family. Beatrice was dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, looking every bit the distressed and exhausted matriarch. Melody sat beside her, clutching a tissue, while Kendrick leaned back in his chair wearing a smug, confident smirk. They had hired a man named Thomas Reed to represent them. Thomas was a notoriously aggressive family law attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of predatory litigation. He was a shark in a cheap suit known for intimidating vulnerable defendants into settling out of court. But I was not vulnerable, and I had no intention of settling. The judge, a stern older woman with sharp eyes named Honorable Judge Davis, called the courtroom to order. This is a preliminary hearing for an emergency conservatorship petition regarding the estate and personal agency of Sloane, she announced, looking down over her reading glasses. Counselor, you may proceed. Thomas stood up, adjusting his tie and stepping out from behind his desk. He did not look at me. He addressed the judge with a theatrical tone, dripping with fake empathy. Your Honor, we are here today because of a tragedy. My clients are not seeking financial gain. They are a loving, terrified family desperately trying to save their daughter and sister from herself. Last month, Sloane suffered a catastrophic automobile accident. She sustained severe chest injuries and, more importantly, significant head trauma. Since waking from her coma, her personality has drastically altered. She has become paranoid, aggressive, and entirely detached from reality. She is currently hoarding control over a $12 million trust fund while refusing to pay her own mounting medical bills. We are asking the court to grant Beatrice immediate emergency conservatorship to protect Sloane from completely destroying her own life. Judge Davis listened impassively, making a single note on her legal pad. Call your first witness, counselor. Thomas turned toward his table. I call Beatrice to the stand. My mother stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the wooden railing as she made her way to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. The performance began immediately. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed pleadingly on the judge. Thomas approached the stand. Beatrice, can you please tell the court what happened when you tried to visit your daughter after she was discharged from the hospital? Beatrice let out a shaky breath, raising a tissue to dab at the corner of her eye, perfectly careful not to smudge her expensive mascara. We were just so worried, she began, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. After the accident, Sloane completely vanished. She blocked us from the hospital and refused to answer our calls. When we finally found out she was recovering at her penthouse, Melody Kendrick and I went over to check on her. We brought her favorite flowers. We just wanted to make sure she was eating and taking her medication. But when we walked in, she was completely unrecognizable. Thomas nodded encouragingly. Unrecognizable in what way, Beatrice? She was like a wild animal, Beatrice sobbed, letting one single tear fall down her cheek. She started screaming at us, accusing Kendrick of trying to steal from her. She claimed I was trying to ruin her life. She was completely delusional. Then she hit a panic button and ordered her armed security guards to physically attack us. They grabbed Kendrick and twisted his arm. They dragged me out of the apartment while I begged my daughter to let me help her. She is not in her right mind, Your Honor. The painkillers and the head injury have made her violently paranoid. I sat perfectly still beside Pierce. I did not shake my head, I did not roll my eyes, and I did not object. I simply watched my mother commit perjury under oath. The audacity was almost mesmerizing. She painted herself as the ultimate victim, a loving mother brutalized by a deranged daughter. She claimed I was hoarding my own money while ignoring the reality that she had maxed out her credit cards, trying to maintain a lifestyle she could no longer afford. Thomas paced in front of the witness stand, letting Beatrice's fake tears echo through the quiet courtroom. Your Honor, this is a clear case of accident-induced psychosis. Sloane is a danger to herself and her estate. Thomas finally finished his theatrical pacing and returned to his seat, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Beatrice remained in the witness box, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. Judge Davis turned her sharp gaze toward our table. Does the respondent have any cross-examination for this witness, or any preliminary evidence to submit? The judge asked, her voice echoing slightly in the large, quiet room. Pierce stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not mirror Thomas in his aggressive pacing. Pierce stood perfectly still, radiating a cold, surgical calm. "We do not need to cross-examine the petitioner, Your Honor." Pierce began, his voice smooth and steady. "Her perjury is already well documented within the evidence I am about to submit." I watched Thomas bristle in his chair, ready to object, but Pierce was already handing a thick, bound folder to the bailiff. "First, Your Honor, we would like to address the baseless claim that my client is suffering from accident-induced psychosis or any cognitive decline." Inside that folder is a sworn 10-page medical affidavit from Dr. Gregory, the Chief of Neurology at Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Gregory conducted a comprehensive 6-hour psychiatric and cognitive evaluation of Sloane yesterday. His medical conclusion is unequivocal. My client possesses exceptional mental acuity and shows zero signs of paranoia, psychosis, or instability. She is in the top 1 percentile of cognitive function. Thomas opened his mouth to argue, but Judge Davis was already scanning the first few pages of the medical report. She nodded slowly, accepting the medical authority without question. Thomas sank back into his chair, his confident smirk faltering slightly. Pierce did not give them a single second to recover. He pulled a small encrypted flash drive from his pocket and handed it to the bailiff. "Secondly, Your Honor, the petitioner claims she was terrified during the accident and left the scene in a state of medical shock to find help for her daughter. We submit into evidence Exhibit B. This is the dual-facing cloud-synced dashcam footage recovered from my client's vehicle on the night of the crash. I request the court view this brief video immediately." Judge Davis plugged the drive into her terminal monitor. The courtroom fell into a heavy, dead silence as the audio from the crash filled the space. Even from my seat, I could hear the horrific crunch of metal and my own desperate, gasping breaths. I kept my eyes locked on Beatrice. Her fake tears vanished instantly. The color completely drained from her face as she heard her own voice echoing from the judge's speakers, complaining about a house foreclosure and abandoning me to the freezing snow. Judge Davis watched the screen, her expression hardening into stone. When the video ended, she looked up at Beatrice with a gaze so fiercely cold it could freeze boiling water. "Is there anything else, counselor?" the judge asked, her voice tight with suppressed anger. Pierce was just getting started. "Yes, Your Honor. The petitioner also claims under oath that she filed this conservatorship to protect my client's financial assets. I submit Exhibit C." Pierce handed a second folder to the bailiff. "These are the certified financial records from the hospital and my client's emergency credit card issuer. While my client was lying in a coma on life support, the petitioner attempted to access Sloane's emergency platinum card. She did not use this card to pay for medical specialists or arrange for physical therapy. According to the time-stamped transaction logs, the petitioner attempted to authorize a $4,000 purchase at the Chanel boutique on Michigan Avenue less than 48 hours after leaving her daughter to die in a crushed vehicle. The transaction was automatically flagged and declined by the fraud department. A collective gasp rippled through the few spectators sitting in the back rows of the courtroom. Melody stared at her mother in genuine shock, clearly unaware of the attempted Chanel purchase. Kendrick rubbed his jaw, looking extremely nervous as the walls closed in around them. Thomas stood up frantically, trying to salvage the disaster. "Your Honor, these documents are completely out of context. My client was suffering from extreme grief and was not thinking clearly." Judge Davis slammed her gavel down with a sharp, violent crack that made Thomas flinch. "Sit down, counselor," she ordered, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "Do not insult the intelligence of this court. I have seen enough." Judge Davis turned her attention back to Beatrice, who was gripping the wooden railing of the witness stand, with white knuckles, her breathing shallow and panicked. Pierce stood very quietly right beside me, letting the crushing weight of all the presented evidence speak completely for itself. Judge Davis stared at the documents, her face a mask of absolute judicial fury. She looked up, locking eyes with Thomas. "Counselor," she began, her voice dangerously low. "I have sat on this bench for 22 years. I have seen families tear each other apart over money, but I have rarely seen such calculated predatory malice masquerading as maternal concern. You brought this petition claiming a medical emergency. You presented sworn affidavits alleging severe mental instability. Yet right here I have a signed evaluation from the chief of neurology proving your claims are completely fabricated. Thomas opened his mouth, raising his hands. Your Honor, my clients assured me the situation was dire. Judge Davis cut him off. Do not interrupt me. You attempted to use the legal system to strip a competent woman of her civil rights. You did this on behalf of a petitioner who abandoned her critically injured daughter solely to steal financial documents. Beatrice let out a loud sob, pressing her face into her hands. Please, Your Honor, I was terrified. Judge Davis slammed her gavel down, cracking like a whip. Be quiet, she ordered. You are not the victim here. The only trauma your daughter suffered was being left to die by her own mother in the freezing snow. The judge picked up her pen. I am dismissing this petition for emergency conservatorship with prejudice. Furthermore, given the disturbing evidence regarding the petitioner's attempt to access the respondent's financial accounts while she was on life support, I am upgrading the temporary restraining order. Beatrice, you are now under a permanent order of protection. You are legally forbidden from coming within 1,000 feet of Sloane, her residence, her offices, or any medical facility treating her. If you attempt to contact her, you will be immediately arrested and incarcerated. This hearing is adjourned. Judge Davis signed the order with a sharp flourish, stood up, and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. The heavy wooden door closed, leaving a stunned silence. Thomas did not waste a single second. He aggressively shoved his legal pads into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and glared down at Beatrice. You lied to me, he hissed, his voice echoing. You told me she was a deranged invalid. You committed perjury and dragged my firm into it. Do not ever contact my office again. He turned and marched out of the courtroom, leaving my family completely abandoned at the petitioner's table. Beatrice remained frozen in her chair, her face buried in her hands. Melody sat beside her, looking genuinely terrified. The reality of their public humiliation and complete legal defeat was finally sinking in. Pierce gently unlocked the brakes on my wheelchair. Let us go, Sloane, he said quietly. We are done here. I nodded, adjusting my blazer. We rolled down the center aisle of the courtroom, leaving my mother and sister drowning in their own mess. We passed through the heavy oak doors and moved into the wide marble hallway of the courthouse. The air outside felt cool and clean. We were heading toward the elevators when I heard the sharp sound of leather shoes clapping against the floor behind us. Kendrick had slipped out of the courtroom just before the judge issued her final ruling. He matched our pace, walking aggressively alongside my wheelchair. His arrogant smirk had returned, completely replacing the nervous sweat from earlier. He leaned down slightly, ensuring Pierce could not hear him over the echoing noise of the busy hallway. He smelled of cheap cologne and desperate confidence. You think you are so smart? Sloane, Kendrick whispered, his voice a venomous hiss right next to my ear. You think embarrassing your mother in there actually changes anything? It does not matter what the judge said today. It does not matter that you kept your little trust fund. You are already too late. I glanced at him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. Kendrick smiled, showing his teeth. The Aspen property is already sold, he taunted, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. I finalized the transfer this morning. The cash is already sitting safely in my account. You can keep your little victory in there, but I just took $4 million right out from under you. You lose. He stood there, practically vibrating with a false sense of absolute invincibility, completely unaware of the massive trap he had just sprung on himself. He thought he had outsmarted the legal system using my own assets against me. He assumed I was just a helpless target he could casually step on for easy profit. I stopped the wheelchair, looking up at my arrogant black African-American brother-in-law. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I hope you like federal prison, Kendrick, I replied softly. I hope you like federal prison, Kendrick, I replied softly. He stopped walking and let out a loud barking laugh that echoed down the marble corridor. He shook his head, looking at me with pure condescension. Federal prison, he mocked, wiping a fake tear from his eye. You are losing your touch, Sloane. You are so desperate to hold on to your power that you are just throwing out empty threats. The deed was legally notarized. The transfer was officially filed with the county clerk. It is a done deal, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to reverse it. He straightened his tie and gave me a mocking little salute before turning and walking away toward the exit doors. He strutted out of the courthouse with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had just pulled off the perfect crime. Pierce pushed my wheelchair toward our waiting vehicle. We did not say another word about my arrogant brother-in-law. We did not need to. We just needed to wait for the banking alerts to trigger. Through the rigorous digital surveillance my security team maintained on the Aspen property, I was able to track exactly how the fraudulent sale progressed over the next 48 hours. Kendrick was moving with reckless speed. The luxury hotel development group he was dealing with was a massive corporate entity based in Denver. They had been eyeing that specific commercial lot for over 3 years. My late father had routinely rejected their aggressive offers because he knew the land would eventually double in value. But Kendrick was not interested in long-term investments. He just needed immediate cash to save himself from the IRS and his own legal disasters. On Thursday morning, Kendrick arranged a final closing meeting at a high-end corporate boardroom downtown. He arrived wearing his most expensive suit, carrying his leather briefcase, and projecting the image of a highly successful estate manager. The development group sent their senior acquisition executives and their corporate legal team. Kendrick presented the forged deed of transfer, featuring my perfectly copied signature right next to the fraudulent stamp from Gary the corrupt notary. Because the documents appeared completely legitimate on the surface and had already been hastily processed by the county clerk, the developer's corporate lawyers did not raise any red flags. They assumed my family was simply liquidating assets after a tragic accident, just as Kendrick had pitched to them. The terms of the sale were straightforward, but highly favorable to the buyer due to Kendrick's desperation. The total purchase price for the Aspen lot was $4 million. However, Kendrick had negotiated a specific clause to secure immediate liquidity. He demanded a massive 20% non-refundable down payment to be wired on the day of the signing, with the remaining balance to be paid within 30 days. The hotel developers agreed to the terms, eager to finally acquire the prime real estate. They slid the final closing documents across the polished boardroom table. Kendrick did not hesitate. He confidently signed his name as the authorized representative of the estate, acting under the false authority he had manufactured. The lead executive shook Kendrick's hand and instructed the corporate financial department to initiate the wire transfer. At exactly 2 p.m. Central Time, the massive financial transaction was digitally executed. The funds left the development group's corporate account in Denver, crossed state lines through the federal banking system, and arrived in Chicago. The money did not go into a secure estate trust or any account bearing my name. Following the exact routing instructions Kendrick had provided, the massive sum was deposited directly into a standard joint checking account owned exclusively by Kendrick and Melody. $800,000. It was an astronomical amount of stolen money sitting right there in their personal bank account. I knew the exact moment the wire cleared because my forensic accountant flagged the massive influx of cash through his continued monitoring of their financial records. I could easily picture the scene in their house that afternoon. Kendrick logging into his mobile banking app, Melody leaning over his shoulder, the two of them staring at the massive 6-figure balance and screaming in absolute triumph. They thought they had outsmarted a crisis management executive. They thought they had secured their glamorous lifestyle for the next decade. They had completely convinced themselves that they were untouchable masterminds who had just successfully stolen my father's legacy. They had no idea that the $800,000 currently sitting in their checking account was not a victory prize. It was the heavy iron anchor that was going to drag them straight to the bottom of the ocean. I was ready to unleash the final phase of my revenge plan. The moment the $800,000 cleared into their joint checking account, Kendrick and Melody completely lost their minds. They did not hire a financial advisor. They did not attempt to pay off Kendrick's looming tax debt with the IRS or quietly settle Melody's maxed-out credit cards. Criminals who stumble into a massive payday rarely act with financial prudence. They act with the frantic, impulsive greed of people who have been starving for validation. Within 24 hours of the wire transfer hitting their bank, Melody posted a new video to her social media accounts. This time, there were no fake tears or pleas for sympathy regarding my medical condition. She was sitting in the VIP lounge of a high-end jewelry boutique, holding a glass of complimentary champagne. Kendrick was standing behind her, grinning like he had just conquered the financial world. He reached down and fastened a solid gold Rolex around her wrist before flashing a matching diamond-encrusted timepiece on his own arm. The caption on the video read simply, "Celebrating our new chapter and securing the family legacy." It was an absolutely sickening display of arrogance, but to me, it was a brilliant piece of evidentiary gold. They were publicly documenting their use of stolen federal funds. They did not stop at luxury watches. According to my forensic accountant's daily monitoring logs, they immediately dropped $40,000 to book 2 first-class tickets for a month-long luxury vacation to Dubai. They reserved the royal suite at a 7-star hotel and chartered a massive private yacht for lavish daily excursions. They were spending the hotel developers' money as fast as they could swipe their debit cards. They were acting as if the money was an endless fountain of wealth, rather than a highly traceable federal wire transfer. Meanwhile, my mother Beatrice was conducting her own victory tour across the affluent suburbs of Chicago. With her credit cards suddenly paid down by a generous cash gift from Kendrick, she returned to her exclusive country club like a conquering queen. She booked a private cabana by the pool and invited all the wealthy socialites she had been desperately trying to impress for years. According to a mutual acquaintance who was at the club that day, Beatrice spent the entire afternoon sipping expensive cocktails and bragging loudly about her brilliant son-in-law. She told anyone who would listen that Kendrick had masterfully navigated a complex real estate deal, saving the family estate from my incompetent hands. She spun a beautiful fairy tale where I was the tragic villain who had been rightfully stripped of my power by a judge. She paraded around the clubhouse in a new Chanel outfit, claiming that justice had finally been served and her financial future was completely secure. They had completely and utterly forgotten about me. In their narrow minds, the war was officially over. They assumed that my absolute silence over the past few days was proof of my ultimate defeat. They believed that because they had successfully filed the forged paperwork with the county clerk, the system had validated their theft. They thought I was sitting alone in my penthouse crying over my lost property and licking my wounds. They confused my strategic patience with weakness. They assumed I was all bark and no bite. It never even occurred to them that a crisis management executive who destroys corporate monopolies for a living might be quietly letting them walk further into a trap. They were so blinded by the shiny new watches and the first-class plane tickets that they failed to notice the absolute silence from my legal team. They did not wonder why I had not filed a police report or attempted to freeze the Aspen transaction. They were completely insulated by their own breathtaking arrogance. Every time Melody swiped her card to buy designer luggage for their upcoming Dubai trip, she was adding another count of money laundering to their impending federal indictment. Every time Beatrice bragged to her country club friends, she was providing witness testimony to her complicity in the scheme. I spent my days in physical therapy, slowly rebuilding my physical strength, and finally discarding my wheelchair for a sleek silver walking cane. I spent my nights in my home office coordinating with Pierce and the authorities. We were building a concrete, airtight case. The trap was no longer just set. The steel jaws were completely locked around their ankles. They just had not looked down to realize they were bleeding yet. I allowed them to enjoy exactly 1 week of their stolen millionaire lifestyle. I let them taste the absolute pinnacle of luxury because I knew the fall from that height would shatter them completely. They wanted to celebrate their grand theft. I was going to give them a spectacular party they would simply never forget. While my family was busy picking out designer luggage and sipping expensive champagne, my real work was just beginning behind closed doors. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table in my private executive boardroom. The room was soundproofed and swept for listening devices, standard protocol for a crisis management firm. But today, I was not hosting corporate clients. I was hosting the federal government. Sitting across from me were two senior special agents from the white-collar crime division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Miller was a tall, sharp-eyed man who specialized in massive corporate fraud, while his partner, Agent Vance, was a forensic accounting expert who had spent the last decade tracking illicit offshore wire transfers. My attorney Pierce sat to my right, with a thick, meticulously organized binder of evidence resting on the polished wood between us. We had just finished walking the agents through the timeline of the forged deed, the corrupt notary, and the subsequent $800,000 wire transfer from the Denver hotel developers. Agent Miller tapped his pen against his notebook, reviewing the copy of the forged deed Kendrick had filed in Colorado. He looked up at me with a professional, detached curiosity. "The forgery is blatant, Ms. Sloane," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "However, usually in cases involving family trust funds, the defense attempts to argue that the perpetrator had implied consent or a verbal agreement to act as an estate proxy. Since your father left the Aspen property in the trust, your brother-in-law might try to claim he was simply expediting the sale to cover your medical expenses, just as he told the developers. It will be a messy defense, but a desperate lawyer will absolutely try it." I looked at Pierce, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. Pierce opened the thick binder and pulled out a single sheet of watermarked legal paper, sliding it across the table toward Agent Miller. "That would be a fascinating defense, Agent Miller," I replied, leaning forward slightly. "But it would fail immediately because of one massive, crucial detail. The Aspen property was never actually a part of my father's trust fund." Both FBI agents stopped writing and looked at me. Agent Vance frowned, picking up the watermarked paper. "What do you mean?" he asked. "The documents your mother stole from your vehicle clearly listed the Aspen commercial lot as the crown jewel of the estate trust." I let out a soft, dry laugh. "The documents my mother stole from my wrecked car were completely useless, outdated drafts," I explained, feeling a deep sense of vindication wash over me. 2 years before my father died, he realized exactly how greedy and manipulative my mother and sister were becoming. He knew that if he ever passed away, they would relentlessly attack his estate and try to bleed me dry. So he quietly restructured his most valuable assets to protect me. He secretly transferred the entire Aspen commercial lot out of his personal name and removed it entirely from the pending trust fund. He deeded the property directly into a blind limited liability company called Apex Holdings. "And who owns Apex Holdings?" Agent Miller asked, his eyes scanning the certified document Pierce had just handed him. "I am the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "My father gave me total corporate ownership of the land years ago. The papers Beatrice risked my life to steal were nothing more than early unexecuted drafts my father had my lawyers draw up before he changed his mind. They were essentially expensive garbage." She stepped over my bleeding body and left me to die in the freezing snow to steal literal trash. The silence in the boardroom was absolute as the two federal agents processed the magnitude of this revelation. The plot twist completely dismantled any possible legal defense Kendrick could ever hope to mount. Agent Vance let out a low whistle, setting the paper down. "Do they know?" he asked. "Do they have any idea that they just sold a property owned by a private corporate entity?" "Not a clue," I replied. "Clue. They think they stole from a family trust. They do not realize they just committed corporate espionage and defrauded a massive holding company. Which means Kendrick did not just forge a family document. He forged the signature of a corporate executive to illegally liquidate a commercial asset." Agent Miller closed his notebook and exchanged a significant look with his partner. This changes the entire scope of the investigation," he said, his tone shifting from investigative to tactical. "We are no longer investigating a simple family dispute. We are no longer investigating a simple family dispute." Agent Miller leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished mahogany table. He looked at the forged deed and then back at me. "By forging the signature of a corporate executive to illegally sell a commercial asset owned by an LLC, your brother-in-law has escalated this into a major federal offense." Agent Vance pulled a pristine legal pad from his briefcase and uncapped his pen. "Let us break down exactly what Kendrick and Melody are facing," he said, his voice clinically precise. "First, we have identity theft. Kendrick impersonated you, a corporate officer, to execute a legally binding contract. Second, we have interstate grand larceny. He fraudulently sold a $4 million commercial property located in Colorado while operating out of Illinois. But the real nail in the coffin is the $800,000 down payment he demanded from the hotel developers." Agent Miller nodded, his expression hardening. "The moment that money crossed state lines from Denver to Chicago via an electronic bank transfer, it triggered the federal wire fraud statute. Wire fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in federal prison per count. Because the defrauded amount exceeds $500,000 and involves a corporate entity, the federal sentencing guidelines mandate a severe minimum sentence. This is not a crime where a sleazy lawyer can negotiate a slap on the wrist or secure probation. It is a mandatory federal sentence. Kendrick is looking at a minimum of 10 to 15 years behind bars without the possibility of early parole." "And what about my sister?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "She did not sign the forged deed, but the money went directly into a joint checking account with her name on it." Agent Vance began writing rapidly on his notepad. "Melody is completely implicated as a willing participant and an accessory after the fact. Since our financial tracking shows she is actively spending the stolen funds on luxury watches and international flights, she is actively committing money laundering. She is spending proceeds derived directly from a federal crime. If she attempts to board that first-class flight to Dubai, she will be apprehended at the airport for attempting to flee the country with laundered federal funds." I leaned back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of closure locking into place. The trap I had laid was flawless. "What about the notary?" I asked. He stamped the forged signature. "We will pick him up this afternoon," Agent Miller stated flatly. "Corrupt notaries are usually cowards. The moment we threaten him with federal conspiracy charges, he will flip and testify against Kendrick to save himself. We will have a sworn confession from the man who watched your brother-in-law forge your name before dinner time. The FBI has a 99% conviction rate for a reason, Ms. Sloane. We do not move until we have absolute proof, and you have handed us an airtight case on a silver platter. The only question remaining is how you want to proceed with the arrest." Pierce closed his thick binder of evidence and looked at me. "Normally, the Bureau would just kick their front door down at dawn," he said. "But given the severe public defamation campaign your family waged against you, claiming you were mentally incompetent and abusive, I believe you deserve the opportunity to control the public narrative of their downfall." I smiled, my eyes meeting the federal agents. "I do not want them arrested quietly in their pajamas," I said, my voice cold and calculating. "Tomorrow night, Kendrick and Melody are hosting a massive, lavish rebranding party at a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. They invited hundreds of high-net-worth investors, socialites, and local media to announce the launch of Kendrick's new independent real estate firm. They are using the stolen $800,000 to fund the catering, the champagne, and the venue. They want to celebrate their brilliant success in front of the entire city." Agent Miller slowly closed his notebook, a hint of a grim smile touching the corners of his mouth. "A public gathering of investors," he noted. "It sounds like the perfect place to execute a federal arrest warrant for wire fraud." "Exactly," I replied. "I want to attend that party. I want to walk into that ballroom, look my family in the eye, and publicly dismantle the fake empire they built on my blood and my money. I want every single person they tried to impress to watch the federal government place them in handcuffs. Agent Vance packed away his files. We will coordinate and have our tactical teams on standby at the hotel tomorrow night, he said, standing up to shake my hand. We will coordinate and have our tactical teams on standby at the hotel tomorrow night, Agent Vance said, standing up to shake my hand. We will wait for your signal, Miss Sloane. When you are ready to drop the hammer, just let us know and we will move in. I shook his hand, feeling a surge of pure adrenaline. Thank you, gentlemen. I will see you tomorrow night. The following day was a blur of calculated preparation. I did not go into the office. Instead, I transformed my penthouse into a war room. I had my crisis PR team working remotely, ensuring that every piece of documentation we had gathered, the forged deed, the dashcam footage, the financial records, and the LLC ownership papers, was properly formatted and queued up on my private server. I wanted everything ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The event Kendrick and Melody were hosting was not just a small family gathering. It was a massive, lavish spectacle designed to cement Kendrick's fake status as a heavy hitter in the Chicago real estate scene. They had rented out the grand ballroom at the Palmer House Hilton, one of the most historic and expensive venues in the city. The invitations, which had been aggressively promoted on Melody's social media, promised an evening of unparalleled luxury to celebrate the launch of Kendrick's new independent brokerage firm, Vanguard Properties. They had invited over 300 guests, including high-net-worth investors, local politicians, prominent socialites, and several journalists from local business publications. They were using my stolen $800,000 to buy the audience they so desperately craved. I knew that a quiet arrest would simply allow them to spin the narrative. They would claim it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, or a temporary setback. They would use their remaining social capital to gather sympathy and paint themselves as victims of an aggressive federal overreach. I could not allow that. I needed their destruction to be so public, so undeniable, and so spectacular that they would never be able to show their faces in this city again. I needed to shatter their illusion of power right in front of the very people they were trying to impress. Late in the afternoon, I logged onto the event website using a pseudonym and RSVP'd for one. I did not need an invitation. My crisis management firm handled PR for the hotel management group, so securing access was merely a matter of making a single phone call to the general manager. I informed him that there might be a slight disruption at the Vanguard Properties event that evening, and requested that hotel security stand down when the federal agents arrived. He agreed immediately, eager to avoid any negative press for his hotel. With the logistics secured, I turned my attention to my appearance. I was not going to arrive looking like a victim recovering from a car crash. I needed to project absolute dominance. I selected a striking, tailored crimson pantsuit that hid my remaining bandages but commanded attention. I paired it with diamond stud earrings and a sleek silver walking cane that looked more like an eccentric accessory than a medical necessity. My makeup was sharp and flawless, hiding any lingering pallor from the accident. I looked exactly like the ruthless CEO I was. At 7:30 that evening, my private driver pulled the town car up to the valet stand at the Palmer House Hilton. The entrance was bustling with elegantly dressed guests heading toward the grand ballroom. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting my face. I grasped my silver cane and walked through the revolving doors, the rhythmic click of the metal tip echoing against the marble floors. I made my way up the grand staircase to the mezzanine level where the ballroom was located. The doors were wide open, spilling warm golden light and the sound of a live jazz quartet into the hallway. I paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. Kendrick and Melody had spared no expense. The room was dripping with crystal chandeliers and massive floral arrangements. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with trays of expensive champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The attendees were mingling, laughing, and admiring the lavish setup. At the far end of the ballroom, Kendrick stood on a slightly elevated stage holding a microphone. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, looking like a king surveying his newly conquered kingdom. Melody stood beside him in a glittering designer gown, her new Rolex catching the light as she waved to the crowd. Beatrice was holding court near the front row of tables surrounded by her country club friends beaming with maternal pride. I watched them for a moment, letting the sheer audacity of their performance wash over me. They were celebrating a fake empire built entirely on stolen money and forged signatures. They were standing on a trapdoor, and they had absolutely no idea that I was holding the lever. I tightened my grip on my cane, took a deep breath, and stepped through the ballroom doors, ready to burn their empire to the ground. I tightened my grip on my cane, took a deep breath, and then I did something that would set the tone for the entire evening. I leaned the silver cane against the heavy brass handle of the ballroom door, abandoning it completely. I did not need it anymore. The lingering ache in my ribs was entirely masked by a massive surge of adrenaline. I smoothed the lapels of my crimson designer suit, squared my shoulders, and stepped into the grand ballroom, walking with absolute perfect posture. There was no limp, no hesitation, and no weakness. I moved with the predatory grace of a woman who was about to dismantle her enemies. The grand ballroom was a magnificent display of stolen wealth. The crowd was a curated collection of the city's elite. I recognized several prominent hedge fund managers, a few local politicians, and a handful of wealthy real estate developers Kendrick was desperately trying to court. They were mingling and laughing, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were attending a party funded by a federal crime. At the front of the room, standing on a raised mahogany stage, Kendrick tapped a crystal flute against the microphone to command the room's attention. The jazz quartet stopped playing, and the crowd turned toward him, raising their glasses. Kendrick smiled, his teeth flashing under the stage lights. He looked incredibly pleased with himself, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Kendrick began, his voice booming smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Tonight is not just about the launch of Vanguard Properties. It is about resilience. It is about the unbreakable power of family legacy and the rewards of unrelenting hard work." I continued walking slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. A few guests near the back turned to look at me, their conversations trailing off as they took in my sharp crimson suit and unwavering gaze. "Building an empire from the ground up is never easy," Kendrick continued, raising his glass toward Melody, who was standing near the edge of the stage. "My beautiful wife and I have faced significant trials recently. We navigated a sudden and tragic family crisis that tested our strength. But through faith, determination, and a commitment to protecting our family assets, we persevered. We took control of our destiny and turned a painful situation into a multi-million-dollar foundation for our future." I was halfway down the aisle now. More guests were turning to stare. The ripple of silence was spreading rapidly through the crowd like a wave. People who knew me from the corporate world began whispering to their companions. They knew exactly who I was, and they knew I was supposed to be severely incapacitated. Yet here I was, walking flawlessly through the crowd, radiating absolute authority. Beatrice was the first one on the stage to notice the shift in the room's energy. She was standing near the front row, clapping politely at Kendrick's speech when she glanced over her shoulder. The polite smile froze instantly on her face. Her eyes widened in sheer terror, and the blood drained completely from her cheeks. She instinctively took a step backward, bumping into a cocktail table and rattling the expensive glasses. Melody followed her mother's gaze. When she saw me striding down the center aisle, she actually gasped out loud, covering her mouth with her hand. Her new diamond Rolex caught the stage lights as her arm shook violently. She looked like she was staring at a dangerous ghost. Kendrick was still talking, entirely focused on his own grandstanding. "Therefore, I want to raise a toast to the future," he declared, projecting his voice to the back of the massive room. "To Vanguard Properties, to hard work, and to seizing every single opportunity that comes your way." He swept his gaze across the audience, expecting thunderous applause. Instead, he was met with a heavy, suffocating silence. The entire ballroom had gone completely dead. Nobody clapped. Nobody raised their glasses. Every single eye in the room was locked entirely on me. Kendrick lowered his champagne flute, his arrogant smile finally faltering. He squinted past the glare of the stage spotlights, trying to see exactly what had captivated his audience. Then his eyes locked onto mine. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting casually in the pockets of my crimson suit. I did not glare or scowl. I just offered him a cold, knowing smile. Kendrick froze mid-breath. His mouth hung slightly open, and the color washed out of his face. The microphone in his hand let out a sharp metallic whine as his grip faltered. The silence in the grand ballroom was now completely absolute. I did not break my stride as I bypassed the stunned crowd and headed straight for the elevated audiovisual control station positioned at the far right corner of the ballroom. The hired DJ, a young man in a sharp vest, saw me approaching and instinctively reached for his headphones. Before he could utter a word, I pulled my iPad from my leather portfolio and set it firmly on his mixing console. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "I am taking over the main feed." The DJ looked toward the stage, expecting Kendrick to intervene, but Kendrick was still frozen in shock, staring at me like a deer caught in the headlights. Taking his silence as permission, the DJ stepped back, holding his hands up in surrender. I worked with the rapid precision of a media professional who had orchestrated hundreds of corporate press conferences. I unplugged the auxiliary cable feeding the jazz music into the house speakers and connected it directly to my device. Next, I bypassed the hotel video feed, plugging my adapter into the primary projection matrix. Kendrick had rented 3 massive high-definition LED screens to display his Vanguard Properties logo behind the stage. With a single swipe of my finger, I overrode his display. The massive golden logos vanished instantly, plunging the stage into brief darkness before the screens flared back to life, illuminating the entire ballroom with glaring white light. I picked up the spare wireless microphone resting on the console and flicked the power switch. The sharp click echoed through the room, snapping the crowd out of their collective trance. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear, overpowering Kendrick's dead microphone. "My name is Sloane. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings, and more importantly, I am the sister-in-law of your host tonight." A collective murmur rippled through the sea of investors and socialites. People shifted uncomfortably, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere from celebratory to deeply hostile. Beatrice slumped into a chair at the front table, clutching her chest, while Melody stood completely paralyzed on the stage, her face flushed a deep, humiliating red. Kendrick just gave a very moving speech about family legacy and the rewards of hard work. I continued stepping out from behind the DJ booth so the entire room could see me clearly. He spoke about taking control of his destiny and securing a multi-million-dollar foundation for his new brokerage firm. But as a crisis management executive, I firmly believe in complete transparency. So I think it is only fair that you, the potential investors and partners of Vanguard Properties, understand exactly how this new empire was actually funded. I tapped the screen of my iPad. The 3 massive LED displays behind Kendrick instantly updated. The screen on the left displayed the forged deed of transfer featuring my copied signature and the corrupt notary stamp. The screen on the right displayed the certified state registration documents for Apex Holdings, proving my sole corporate ownership of the Aspen commercial lot. The property Kendrick just sold to a Denver hotel developer did not belong to my father's estate, I announced, my words cutting through the tense silence like a scalpel. It belonged entirely to a blind limited liability company that I own. The signature you see on that transfer deed was forged in a diner parking lot last week. The notary who stamped it gave a full sworn confession to federal authorities this afternoon. The murmurs in the crowd instantly erupted into shocked gasps and frantic whispers. Several prominent hedge fund managers immediately stepped away from the stage, distancing themselves from Kendrick, as if he had suddenly caught a deadly virus. I tapped my screen one more time. The displays shifted, showing the redacted bank statement of Kendrick and Melody's joint checking account, highlighting the massive wire transfer. Kendrick did not secure seed money for this firm. Through brilliant real estate maneuvering, I declared, raising my voice so it carried to the very back of the room. He secured it by illegally liquidating a corporate asset he had absolutely no legal right to touch. The champagne you are drinking, the caviar on your tables, and the ballroom we are standing in right now were all paid for using an $800,000 non-refundable deposit that crossed state lines. In the eyes of the United States government, that money is the direct proceed of federal wire fraud and interstate grand larceny. Kendrick finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. "Turn those screens off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He lunged toward the stage stairs, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is lying. Someone, please get security right now." No security guards rushed into the ballroom. The doors remained completely still. The hotel general manager was a personal friend of mine, and I had already ensured that his staff would not intervene in the unfolding disaster. Kendrick looked around frantically, his panic escalating when he realized no one was coming to his rescue. He gripped the edge of the stage, his knuckles turning white. "You cannot just come in here and show fake documents," Kendrick yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "This is my event. I am a licensed professional. You are just a bitter woman trying to ruin my big night because you are jealous." I smiled casually, leaning against the edge of the DJ booth. "I am not the one who is going to ruin your night." "Kendrick," I said softly, speaking directly into the microphone so the entire room could hear every single syllable. "I actually brought a special guest with me this evening to help you celebrate your new venture. Someone who is very interested in the $800,000 deposit you just collected." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a tall, distinguished man with silver hair stepped forward from the back of the room. He was wearing a dark bespoke suit and radiating an aura of absolute fury. It was Jonathan Preston, the chief executive officer of the Denver Hotel Development Group. I had called him personally that morning and provided him with the certified LLC documents. Once his legal team verified the forgery, he immediately booked a private jet to Chicago. Kendrick stared at the man approaching the stage. The arrogant broker persona completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified criminal. "Mr. Preston," Kendrick stammered, taking a step back. "What are you doing here? We just closed the deal yesterday." Jonathan Preston stopped at the foot of the stage, looking up at Kendrick with pure disgust. "You did not close a deal, Kendrick," he said, his voice loud and commanding, easily carrying through the silent ballroom. "You committed a massive fraud against my corporation. When Ms. Sloane contacted my office this morning, we initiated an immediate review of the county filings. You sold us a piece of commercial real estate that you never had the legal authority to touch. You forged a corporate signature and stole our money." Melody let out a sharp cry, gripping Kendrick's arm. "Kendrick, tell him it is a mistake," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "Tell him the money is safe." Kendrick opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a cornered rat, desperately searching for a way out of a burning building. Jonathan did not wait for an excuse. He snapped his fingers, and a sharp-looking woman in a gray suit stepped out from the crowd, joining him at the front of the stage. She was his lead corporate litigator. She held a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. "We are not here to negotiate," Jonathan stated flatly. "My legal team spent the entire afternoon drafting these filings. We are officially serving you and your wife with a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit for corporate fraud, malicious deception, and breach of contract. We are demanding the immediate return of our $800,000 deposit. Furthermore, we are suing you for an additional $3 million in punitive damages and legal fees." The corporate litigator reached up and slapped the heavy stack of papers directly onto the stage at Kendrick's feet. The loud smack echoed through the room, making Beatrice jump in her seat. "You cannot do this," Kendrick gasped, staring down at the lawsuit as if it were a bomb. "I did not know about the LLC. I thought the land was part of the family trust. I was just acting on behalf of the estate." Ignorance of corporate ownership does not excuse federal wire fraud, Jonathan replied, his voice dripping with contempt. And it certainly does not excuse forging a signature and bribing a notary. We are going to freeze every single bank account tied to your name by tomorrow morning. We will seize this hotel ballroom, the catering, and those ridiculous watches on your wrists if we have to. You messed with the wrong corporation. Melody completely broke down. She dropped her champagne glass, letting it shatter on the stage. She turned on her husband, shoving him hard in the chest. "You told me it was handled," she screamed, her face contorted in rage and fear. "You said the money was ours. You ruined my life." Kendrick stumbled backward, trying to grab her hands. "Melody, calm down. We can fix this," he pleaded, but his voice was weak and hollow. The crowd of investors watched in horrified fascination as the hosts turned on each other violently now. "You told me we were rich," Melody shrieked, her voice breaking as she struck Kendrick's chest again. "You told me the lawyers cleared everything. You lied to me." Kendrick grabbed her wrists, trying to force her to stop making a scene in front of the horrified investors. "Melody, shut up!" he hissed through gritted teeth, his eyes darting frantically across the room. "We can call Thomas. We can hire a better defense attorney. We just need to explain that we thought the trust was active. We are not going to jail for a misunderstanding." Melody ripped her hands out of his grip, stumbling backward, until she hit the projection screen displaying the forged deed. "A misunderstanding," she cried, her face stained with ruined makeup. "You forged her signature in a diner parking lot. You gave Gary $5,000 in cash to stamp it. I was sitting right there in the front seat." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. In her absolute panic, Melody had just loudly confessed to witnessing the forgery, confirming every single accusation I had made. Several guests immediately pulled out their smartphones, hitting record to capture the unprecedented collapse of Vanguard Properties. The flashes of phone cameras illuminated the stage like strobe lights. Kendrick realized the catastrophic mistake she had just made. He raised his hands toward the audience, plastering a desperate smile onto his face. "Please, everyone, do not listen to her," he begged, his voice trembling. "She is just hysterical. This is a private family dispute that is being blown completely out of proportion. We are going to resolve this quickly, and the launch will proceed as planned." He never even got to finish his sentence. The heavy brass doors at the back of the grand ballroom swung open with tremendous force. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets with FBI emblazoned across the back marched into the room. They moved with absolute military precision, parting the sea of wealthy socialites and terrified investors. Leading the squad were Agent Miller and Agent Vance, their expressions completely devoid of sympathy. The jazz quartet players abandoned their instruments and backed away from the stage. Agent Miller ascended the stage stairs in 3 quick strides, bypassing the hotel developer and walking straight up to Kendrick. "Kendrick, your new real estate firm is officially out of business," Miller announced, his voice projecting clearly without needing a microphone. Kendrick stepped back, his hands trembling. "What is the meaning of this?" he stammered. "I am a licensed professional. You cannot just storm into my private event." Agent Miller did not entertain the argument. He grabbed Kendrick's arm, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the LED screen displaying his own forged document. "Kendrick, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate grand larceny, and identity theft," Miller recited, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it because your wife just gave us a beautiful public confession." The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the silent ballroom sounded like a gunshot. Kendrick let out a pathetic whimper as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The expensive custom tuxedo he wore tore slightly at the shoulder, a perfect physical manifestation of his ruined facade. Every single investor he had invited, every local politician he had tried to bribe, and every journalist he had courted was currently filming his federal arrest in high definition. His entire career and reputation were obliterated in less than 60 seconds. Melody stared at the handcuffs locking around her husband's wrists. The reality of the federal prison sentence finally shattered her delusion. She looked at Agent Vance, who was stepping onto the stage toward her. She panicked. Without a single word, Melody hiked up her glittering designer gown and sprinted toward the side exit behind the stage curtains. She did not make it far. Two female FBI agents were already positioned by the service doors. As Melody pushed through the heavy velvet drapes, they grabbed her by the arms, hauling her back onto the stage. "Let me go!" she screamed, kicking her expensive heels against the floor. "I did not sign anything. I am innocent. Kendrick made me do it." Agent Vance stepped forward, producing his own set of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering," Vance stated coldly, snapping the cuffs around her wrists right over her brand-new diamond Rolex. "You spent federal evidence on luxury jewelry and plane tickets. You are going away for a very long time." The crowd of elite guests watched in absolute stunned silence as the two hosts of the evening were paraded across their own stage in federal restraints. Flashbulbs continued to erupt, capturing every single humiliating second of their downfall. The journalists in the room were already drafting their explosive headlines on their phones. Kendrick kept his head down, refusing to look at the audience he had tried to swindle. Melody was sobbing uncontrollably, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She looked out into the crowd, searching frantically for someone to help her. Her eyes finally landed on our mother. Beatrice was still sitting at the front table, her face completely drained of color. She looked at her golden child, the daughter she had always favored, being hauled away by federal agents. But Beatrice did not stand up. She did not scream or try to intervene. She just sat there, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction. The heavy ballroom doors slammed shut behind the federal agents, sealing Kendrick and Melody's fate. The jazz quartet was long gone, and the only sound left in the massive space was the furious clicking of smartphone cameras and the panicked whispers of the remaining high society guests. The glittering launch party had instantly transformed into a spectacular crime scene. Beatrice remained at the front table, staring at the empty space where her golden child had just been hauled away in steel handcuffs. The paralysis holding her hostage finally shattered, replaced by a sudden, violent wave of sheer terror. The luxurious world she had built on a foundation of lies and maxed-out credit cards was collapsing around her in real time. Kendrick was going to federal prison. Melody was an accessory to money laundering. The $800,000 wire transfer was going to be seized by the government to restitute the hotel developer. Beatrice realized with sickening clarity that the massive cash gift Kendrick had promised her to save her foreclosed house was completely gone. She had no safety net. She had no wealthy son-in-law to bail her out. Worse than the impending homelessness was the legal reality crashing down upon her. She had willingly provided my old birthday card to Kendrick so he could practice forging my signature. She had sat in the country club bragging about the fraudulent sale to anyone who would listen. The FBI would inevitably connect her to the conspiracy. She was going to lose her house, her social standing, and quite possibly her own freedom. Beatrice spun around in her chair, her eyes wildly scanning the ballroom until they locked onto me. I was still standing near the DJ booth, my hands resting calmly in the pockets of my crimson suit. I watched her perfectly manicured facade disintegrate. She scrambled out of her chair, her expensive designer gown catching on the table leg and tearing slightly at the seam. She did not care. She pushed past the stunned hedge fund managers and local politicians, stumbling frantically across the polished hardwood floor. The crowd parted for her, stepping back as if her desperation were contagious. She looked nothing like the arrogant matriarch who had stormed into my penthouse demanding I sign away my assets. Her expensive makeup was smeared, her hair was disheveled, and her face was contorted into an ugly mask of absolute panic. When she reached me, she did not try to slap me or scream insults. Her knees simply buckled. Beatrice collapsed onto the floor right in front of me, the heavy silk of her gown pooling around her on the hardwood. She threw her arms forward, wrapping her hands tightly around my legs, clutching the fabric of my suit pants with a desperate white-knuckled grip. "Please, Sloane," she wailed, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent ballroom. "Please do not do this to us. You have to fix this. Tell the federal agents it was all a big misunderstanding. Tell the hotel developer you will give him the money back from your own accounts. You have millions in the bank. You can afford it. Do not let them lock my baby girl in a cage. Do not let the bank take my house. I am your mother. You cannot let them take everything." She pressed her tear-stained face against my knees, sobbing with such violent force that her shoulders shook uncontrollably. The wealthy socialites she had spent years trying to impress were now staring down at her with unfiltered disgust, capturing her ultimate humiliation on their cell phones. I did not step back. I did not try to kick her away or pull her hands off me. I just stood there staring down at the pathetic broken woman weeping at my feet. I let her cry, allowing the reality of her complete destruction to settle heavily into the room. "Let go of my suit." "Beatrice," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth or sympathy. "You ruined the crease." She gasped, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I am your mother," she repeated frantically, tightening her grip. "You owe me." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. "You stopped being my mother the moment you chose a manila envelope over my life," I replied softly, ensuring the surrounding crowd could hear every word. "You left me to bleed out in a wrecked car so you could steal documents that turned out to be completely worthless. You orchestrated a public smear campaign claiming I was insane. You brought this entirely on yourself." I reached down and pried her hands off my legs, letting them drop uselessly to the floor. "I am not saving your house. You get to pay the price. Enjoy the consequences." Beatrice let out a guttural wail. She tried to lunge forward again, her hands grasping blindly at the empty air where I had just been standing. She was a pathetic sight, a woman who had spent her entire existence obsessing over appearances, now utterly destroyed in front of the exact people whose approval she valued above all else. The hedge fund managers and real estate moguls did not offer her a single ounce of pity. I looked down at the woman who had given birth to me. There was absolutely nothing left inside my chest. The space where my love for her used to reside was completely hollow, cauterized by the freezing snow on the night she abandoned me. She was no longer my mother. She was just a stranger drowning in the consequences of her own horrific choices. I took a half step backward, ensuring the hem of my crimson trousers remained completely out of her desperate reach. The ballroom was still eerily quiet save for her frantic sobbing. I wanted every single person in this room to hear my final words to her. I wanted the absolute truth etched into the public record forever. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression perfectly flat. "You left me to bleed to death in the snow so you could save a piece of paper," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute finality. "Now you can freeze with it." Beatrice froze, her jaw dropping open as the sheer gravity of my words finally pierced through her hysteria. I simply turned my back on her. I walked away, my heels clicking a steady, unbothered rhythm across the polished hardwood floor. I headed straight for the heavy brass double doors at the entrance of the grand ballroom. The crowd of wealthy socialites and terrified investors instantly parted for me, creating a wide, unobstructed path. Nobody dared to speak to me. Nobody attempted to stop me. They looked at me with a profound mixture of absolute awe and genuine fear. I had just dismantled an entire family and a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped out into the quiet mezzanine, leaving the chaotic ruins of Kendrick's fake empire far behind me. I walked down the grand marble staircase of the Palmer House Hilton, my posture completely perfect. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was slowly fading, replaced by a deep, profound sense of physical and emotional exhaustion. But the pain in my healing ribs felt entirely different now. It was no longer the agonizing ache of betrayal. It was the sharp, clean sting of survival. I reached the ground floor and slowly crossed the lavishly decorated lobby of the historic hotel building. I stepped through the revolving glass doors and walked out into the crisp, biting air of the Chicago night. My private town car was waiting exactly where I had left it earlier, the engine idling softly at the valet stand. My driver, a quiet and fiercely loyal man named Marcus, immediately stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. He offered a slight nod, his face entirely neutral. "Good evening, Ms. Sloane," Marcus said respectfully, standing at attention by the open car door. "Is the event over?" I slid into the luxurious leather back seat, savoring the absolute quiet of the secure cabin. "Yes, Marcus," I replied, settling back and letting out a long, slow breath. "The event is completely over. Take me home." He closed the door with a solid thud, sealing me inside my own private sanctuary. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the heavy downtown traffic. I leaned my head against the cool tinted glass of the window and looked out at the glittering Chicago skyline. The towering skyscrapers cut sharp silhouettes against the dark winter sky, radiating power and resilience. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely weightless. The heavy chains of my toxic bloodline had been permanently severed. I no longer had to look over my shoulder wondering when the people who were supposed to love me would try to stab me in the back. Kendrick was heading to a federal penitentiary. Melody would soon follow him, her designer lifestyle traded for a concrete cell. Beatrice would lose her beloved country club, her sprawling house, and the false reputation she had sacrificed her own daughter to protect. They had tried to bury me completely, forgetting that I owned the ground they were standing on. I watched the city lights blur past my window, a genuine peaceful smile finally settling on my face. My wealth, my company, and my legacy were entirely my own. The war was officially won, and my new life was just beginning.